Hello and welcome to Cinema Gulp today. This is John.
And this is Ben.
And today we're going to do a quick shot review of The Magnificent Seven.
Sir, I have a proposition. We're decent people being driven from our homes. Slaughtered in cold blood.
Took a job looking for some men to join me. Is it difficult? Impossible.
Antoine Fuqua's latest film is an above-average retelling of the classic 1960s film of the same name, which, in and of itself, was a retelling of the 1954 Seven Samurai by Akira Kurosawa. Since that time, we've gotten a loosely based remake, Battle Beyond the Stars.
I have heard of your battle with the Malmori. I wish to join you.
Oh, yes? What are you going to do? Shoot blanks at Sador?
Fuqua's Magnificent Seven mixes all those together to make a fun, violent, and very satisfying Western film. John, what'd you think of The Magnificent Seven?
Well, I agree with your sentiment there at the end that it was a fun, violent Western. I enjoyed it. It was a good time at the movies. Fuqua has never really been a standout signature director to me. I feel like he's kind of a workman-style director. Most of his movies are these kind of rough, tough, rugged, made-for-guys kind of movies, and most of them are entertaining in that way. They're all kind of action movies, or I guess Southpaw, his last film, was kind of a sports drama. Other than like Training Day, I've never really felt like he's made a stone cold classic, something that will be remembered for a long time. This film was great though. I enjoyed it. I found the performances to be entertaining. I found the characterizations in this film different than the original, and that's what kept it entertaining, that it wasn't just a shot for shot, scene for scene remake. There are differences from the original, but the elements that they kept in place from the original still work really well and are a lot of fun to see in place. What'd you think?
I thought this movie was great. I thought it was a lot of fun. I think you're absolutely right about your points on Antoine Fuqua. That's not a bad thing necessarily. He's kind of a Renaissance director. He can do lots of different things. He's dipped his feet into some different genres now. It's really cool to see him pull off a Western because a lot of people try it and are not successful at it at all.
I think one of them's glass.
Yeah, which one is that? Is that the right one or the left one?
The brown one.
Hey, Cole. Don't make me tell the whole town about that time you screwed that fella in Atlanta, okay?
I think that his style mainly is violence. He has a niche for this really graphic violence, and he gets away with it in this film that somehow turned out to be PG-13. But when you're watching this film, this movie is not just violent by body count, it's violent by the impact of the shots and by the size of the holes in people's bodies. And that just added to a lot of the intensity of a story that's predictable. This is a remake, and even if it wasn't, it's a very simple Western story. Almost every Western can almost be considered a remake of The Magnificent Seven, maybe minus a few characters.
Yeah, to some degree. Yeah, like you said, it's a very simple story. We've seen this told many times over, even in other genres, not always being told as a Western.
Yeah. But
the story is very familiar and predictable at times.
Aside from Antoine Fuqua, I think the cast in this movie was pretty excellent. What did you think of the cast?
There was characters that I wasn't expecting in this film. I knew that we had Chris Pratt and Denzel as the leads. I knew they were gonna kind of fit into the Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen roles, which they do. A lot of these other actors that are great actors that fill out the rest of this cast were a lot of fun to see in this movie. There's a couple others that fill out the actual seven that aren't really known actors, but they do a good job in the roles that they're given. But they were all fun, they were all entertaining, especially when you have Chris Pratt, who's stealing a lot of the one-liners, as he does in most movies.
I feel that actually Chris Pratt, though still playing Chris Pratt, and that's to his benefit and to ours as well because he's good at it. I liked the way they used him in this movie because I didn't feel he was overtaking scene after scene after scene. There's lots of times where he's just kind of playing with a cigar in his mouth, assessing what's going on in the room and listening to other conversations, and lots of times where he's in the background. He's not the main focus hero that you think when you're watching the advertisings for this. You're like, okay, so he's going to be the one taken under Denzel Washington's wing, and it's going to be those two, and you're going to get a lot of quibby comebacks and back and forth, and it wasn't like that at all. It was much more of an ensemble piece. Though Denzel is essentially the main character, it's a very ensemble piece. I thought Ethan Hawke gave the best performance and was also the best character. A lot of different things going on in his eyes, and a lot of really good dialogue. He got some of the juicier dialogue to speak of. I also did think Chris Pratt played to his strengths, but toned it down a little bit. And then we have Denzel doing what he does, which is be a leading man, which he's so good at doing. Vincent D'Onofrio shows up in this movie, and I started laughing instantaneously. I'm assuming that's what he was going for.
I think he was there to be a little bit of comic relief, for sure, as is Chris Pratt's character to some degree.
And some degree, even Ethan Hawke. Vincent D'Onofrio's, it seems to me that it was almost like his decision, like, I just want to play this guy in this really strange way, not for any apparent reason, because, he's the tracker. Okay, Vincent D'Onofrio is that kind of actor. We go, okay, well, that sounds boring. Let me take him and make him this really strange guy that wears really weird clothes and speaks with this really weird voice.
Yeah, I could see that, because Vincent D'Onofrio is kind of that strange character in films. I mean, he'll usually bring something a little bit odd and off-kilter to his roles, and he certainly does here, but it works great. He was one of my favorite characters in the film.
Yeah, he was fantastic.
Ethan Hawke's character was interesting because he's kind of a compilation of characters from the original. They take some of the more interesting things that happened to 2 or 3 characters in the original and put them all together to create Ethan Hawke's character. That's what gives him a little bit more to do, and definitely a little bit more backstory and depth.
That sounds kind of good that they do that, and I think that's one of the things I was happiest about walking out of this film, was that it was a good remake. It was a successful remake. Sometimes there's things that are liberties that are taken, or things that are taken out, or things that are added. I think they made all the right choices by just making it kind of tight and giving it a nice build-up, really good pacing, and then a nice end result. Our big finale.
Yeah, and that was one thing we both mentioned, that we both thought it was paced really well. It kind of has this driving force at the beginning of the film, leading you to the climax. It never gets dull, but I do think that once you get to the climax, it runs on a little bit too long. The film doesn't really have a lot of huge set pieces. It's got, like a Western, it's got a number of moments that are there for action and tension, or standoffs between people that are exciting and tense, but the big action set pieces are kept to a minimum and mainly saved for the end of the film, and that's where I feel like it runs on a little bit and gets Fuqua's style of directing the action towards the end of the film, in my opinion, gets a little bit too much of just cowboys and Indians shooting their guns at each other and falling off the horses and horses riding by.
That's true.
But in a Western, that the action isn't always as dynamic as modern action films.
No, and
you can only do so many things.
And I think what you mentioned about Fuqua kind of not having a specific aesthetic or his own stamp on things, I think with a different type of filmmaker that did have one of those, you might see more, I don't want to say artistic shot choices, but maybe different types of things happening throughout some of those, where this is very standard. There's lots of quick cut editing where there needs to be. It's very standard. Guy shoots gun, cut, watch the guy fall off the horse or off the top of the building.
But it happens quickly. It's not the old school Western where you actually watch the guy fall from the roof and everyone stares.
But if it was shot more like something like High Noon, which also had that build-up, I mean, the whole movie was build-up, then it might not be as successful, because the goal of this film was to be fun, I'm guessing.
And be high-octane action, which Fuqua that's what he usually excels at. Great production values all around. Everything looks great. One thing that I found nice and refreshing was to watch a movie that isn't filled with CGI special effects the whole time. There's a couple times where they actually do use CGI in the film, but it doesn't stand out or take you out of the film enough to where it's a problem. It was just nice to sit back and just watch actual filmmaking.
Yes, and I think with Westerns, you're creating it your own problem when you introduce CGI into a Western setting. It's one of those types of films that lends itself to practical effects. Use those practical effects.
Yeah, for sure.
I will stress this movie is PG-13, but boy, this is stretching the limits of PG-13 when it comes to violence. The body count in this movie is massive.
Yeah, I was actually surprised it was PG-13. I wasn't fully sure until you told me after the movie. It was one of the questions I had for you of really? Because I was actually very surprised at the level of violence in this film.
I'm not talking about Star Killer Base exploding a planet of faceless, nameless people. I'm talking about individual shots of people getting holes through their bodies bodies and hatchets being thrown at people's heads.
And a number of people being somewhat ruthlessly killed while they're unarmed. Just unarmed people just being gunned down. Yeah, it's a pretty brutal movie. The villain can be brutal at times as well.
Though underused. You'd mentioned Peter Sarsgaard, who I think is a fantastic actor and was great in his parts, but just was taken out for large chunks of the film.
Yeah, definitely underused.
But I think that goes with how the film builds up. You're not supposed to be seeing what he's doing. You're supposed to be seeing what the Seven are doing and stuff like that. So.
One other thing I wanted to point out, this was the last time we're going to hear a brand new score by James Horner, who passed away last year. It was great to hear that final score that he worked on. I think there was another name added to the credits, somebody who probably picked up the work that he had started and finished it. It's definitely a James Horner score. You cannot miss that. It's got all of his signatures, like the woodwinds and the gongs from the kind of church bell sounds and stuff. I felt that it's such a standard James Horner score, using everything we've heard him do before. But hey, it's the last thing we're going to have from a great composer who made some of my favorite scores of all time.
Yeah, he's always been one of my all-time favorites. Remember just listening to scores of his as a kid, and yeah, it's a bummer that this is going to be the last time we ever hear him do original work. Everything else we'll just have to listen to Pandora for. On our audience chuggability, I'm going to go high with this one because I think audiences are really going to enjoy it. I think it's got everything. It's a great September release, really. I'm going to go ahead and give this a top shelf recommendation right there.
Audience chuggability for myself, I agree. It would be top shelf. I think audiences are really going to enjoy this. Big stars, it's got everything I think people want to go out to the theater to see for this kind of film. People don't go see Westerns for some reason. Supposedly it's a genre that's hard to get people to come out and see. But when you've got names like Chris Pratt and Denzel Washington, I think it'll draw an audience. So yeah, I'm right there with you, top shelf.
It's great to see a movie where people aren't holding fucking cell phones, and maybe that's why, because millennials can't relate to Western in any way, shape, or form because no one has a cell phone in their hand. Okay, and so on our gulp gauge, I'm going to go ahead and give this 7.5 gulps.
Okay, and for my gulp gauge score, I'm going to give Magnificent 7. I should give it a 7, shouldn't I? No, I'm going to give it a 6.5. I'm just a hard critic,
Well, your 6.5 is my 7.5.
Yeah, no, I do think it's a really entertaining movie that people will enjoy. I just know that over time, it'll be a movie that will be kind of forgotten.
Hey, I wouldn't say it's going to be forgotten. If Ethan Hawke, Antoine Fuqua, and Denzel Washington make one more movie, they've got a 3-pack they can sell at the gas station. They should do, what do they call it, the Quartet trilogy or whatever the hell it's called, the Cordon Blonde trilogy or whatever, the fucking Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
Okay, everyone, that was our quick shot review of The Magnificent Seven. Thanks so much for listening.
Please give us some comments below. Let us know what you thought of the film. And also give us a like below. Check us out on Twitter and Facebook.
At Cinema Gulp. So for Cinema Gulp, this is Ben.
And this is John.
We drink your cinema.
I drink it up! Fight the power!